Hello and welcome to the Intentional Clinician Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Krauss, licensed professional counselor. In today's episode, I'll be speaking with Andrew Henry, a psychotherapist from Arizona. We're going to be talking about all things anxiety related. And we'll be talking about Andrew's new book, which is called Anxiety, When Enough is Enough, available on Apple Books, which is also available in English and Spanish, which is super cool. And it gives you a bunch of ideas and skills. The book is dedicated to those who suffer from anxiety and panic and want relief. As a counselor for over 15 years, Andrew has accumulated several skills that he has published in this book. Andrew hopes that you enjoy learning these skills, and after you're done reading his book, Anxiety, When Enough is Enough, that you will want to share this resource with those you love and care about. Andrew is a frequent guest on this podcast and a very great and interesting therapist who also practices in the following methods with EMDR therapy, hypnosis, Jungian methods, and cognitive behavioral therapy. He treats a number of mental health disorders and provides a neutral ground to adults, children, teens, families, and couples. His focus is to help individuals center in their lives and become aware of their inner strengths. This is achieved by providing a supportive, safe space and listening to their concerns and customizing a treatment plan. Andrew is committed to his clients, and he is really working on helping them go deeper and learn the skills to live a vibrant life. So a little bit about what I'm up to before the interview. I have released this spring my first online course for parents of young adults. What do we do now? And it's live on Udemy right now. Oftentimes, if you've never bought a course on Udemy, there's a large discount, and so the course is anywhere between $10 and $25 for almost 3 hours of detailed content for the parents of young adults, and I hope you enjoy it. The link will be in the show notes. I'm also affiliated with EMDR Training Solutions. These are amazing EMDR trainers that I've known from all over the United States, including Arizona, Minnesota, Florida, California, and more. So if you want to have the best EMDR training experience as a clinician, check out EMDR Training Solutions. They even gave me a coupon, the word intentional. Put that code in at checkout and you'll get $100 off your registration fee. All right, let's get to the interview. Welcoming back to the Intentional Clinician Podcast. It is my pleasure to present Andrew Henry, Masters of Counseling and an LPC in Mesa, Arizona, joining me today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Paul. I greatly appreciate meeting with your audience about this important topic, anxiety.
Absolutely. And I know that you have joined me twice before. And so I think people will be able to look up those episodes and check them out if they like this one. So I appreciate you being a frequent guest.
Absolutely. I'm honored and greatly love helping people to deal with these things. So thank you again, Paul.
You're welcome. And so the reason we're meeting today, one of them, is to talk about anxiety and your new book, Anxiety, When Enough is Enough. And I've been leafing through this book, and it really gets to the point. We've got definitions, we've got some etiology, and then we've got all sorts of interesting approaches that are ways to deal with anxiety. Even an interesting chapter, Can Anxiety Be Useful? And a lot of things to do with therapy, but then a lot of things that have absolutely not much to do with psychotherapy, and how anxiety can be worked with and sat with and laughed at and
that's right.
Meditated with and exercise, all sorts of things. So maybe we could just catch the listeners up a little bit on how do you kind of understand anxiety as a practitioner?
Absolutely, yeah. So dealing with that topic for many years in my practice, Paul, I've looked at this whole idea of anxiety, and to answer your question, I think that our society's dealt with anxiety for millennia, all the way back from when we were in caves and, wondering, where we're going to get our next meal or how to deal with obstructions within our societies. And then fast forward to now, a lot of the anxiety that we're feeling with bigger dilemmas such as pandemic, the remembrance of 9/11 and such. I mean, there's a lot of things that we deal with, and I think we're kind of predisposed to feel that anxiety and to experience it. And a lot of the clients that I work with, they come to me and they wonder, well, why? Why do I feel this anxiety the way I do? Why do I have panic? And how can I get effective skills in order to help deal with this? And that's precisely why I put this book together, because I wanted like a top 12 list of go-to skills for people to utilize and take a look at what, if the top 3 don't work, well, then move along to, go with what actually helps you and what works with you, kind of list. And I didn't want it to be just cookie cutter where, it's only going to be recognized by psychotherapists or psychologists and such. It could appeal to almost any, any niche in any part of our society, potentially.
Yes, absolutely. That's kind of what I'm seeing here, because it starts with a little bit of things that might have to do with psychotherapy and educating people about it. And then it goes to all sorts of other possible practices, wisdom practices, modern and ancient types of remedies or ways to deal with and live with our anxiety. So let's talk about that for just a minute. Just based on what I've read in my career, anxiety is necessary to keep us alive at a base level. Humans seem to have developed what they call a negative bias, which means that we, tend to be looking for threats, and we might, and that was to keep us alive when we were sort of naked in the caves and fighting animals and trying to find food and figuring out which berries were poisonous. And we had to look at everything, scrutinize it. And then it seems that humankind have over the years evolved in many ways in terms of our innovation in our technology. And so we've strived to make what we would call a safe landscape. We've tried to tame nature, move into houses and structures we build that don't have rain coming down on us, that don't have animals coming in or people we don't know coming in and invading us. And yet, even with all these advances in transportation and technology and housing and food manufacturing and all these things we've done to kind of keep us feeling better about our state on this blue orb we're in, people's anxiety is just up there. It is just rampant, and people are feeling it. And and so maybe we haven't fully evolved mentally. We're unable to relax and enjoy what maybe some comforts that if a cave-dwelling human from 10,000 years ago came into our nice apartment or house and sat down to have a meal of rice and some exotic vegetables from all over the world and some meats, that they would think they were in a heaven of types. And yet for us, this is an everyday thing. And now we're worried about other problems.
Precisely. Yeah. Well put. It's like we're kind of predisposed and geared towards, using that anxiety to help us, like you're saying, avoid the traps of what happens, within our environment, food and beyond. And, what that boils down to in my practice when I'm working with people in the here and now is I tell them, the anxiety is real, and you don't need me to tell you that. You can feel it. You feel it in your body. You feel it. You think about it in your worried thoughts. So, what is it that you are anxious about? So many people are running through their lives at a fast pace because we're at a very fast pace in our society, and they don't take the time to actually ask themselves, well, wait a minute, what is it that I am anxious about? What am I worried about? And to sit with that for a moment. That's what I recommend as the first step. Because if those things are just being pushed under the rug or they're being ignored, that can build up and cause more problems in the future. So it's so important for people to just ask themselves, what is it that they're anxious about? Now, occasionally, I do run into some people who say, I've asked myself that and I can't determine what it is that I'm anxious about. I just feel the anxiety. It hits me and I get panicky. I get a panic attack, but nothing's on my mind. Nothing actually is crossing my mind. And I've talked about that within the book too. It could be a physiological or stored somatic experience, which that's a medical term, stored somatic experience, but that relates to psychology, in that it's something that's unresolved and it's stored within the mind and body and then gets triggered by an experience within the here and now. So it's almost like the eyes are like this window of what happened in the past, and it gets triggered by that, and then that person feels it. So their mind might not be quick enough to identify what that was. They could have been passing it within a car, or they could have seen something online, and then all of a sudden they get hit with this anxiety. Well, that's okay, because there are ways to deal with that too, and there's ways to help people, deal with the unknown anxiety, such as with hypnosis or EMDR or and Carl Jung's shadow work. So that's.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that real quick so the reason is that people may not know what they're anxious about is because we live in a very stimulating world. If you live in a city or an urban area or even a mid-sized city that is not a rural, woodsy, field, desert area, you are going to be more stimulated than a person living out away from people. Not to say that a person living out and away couldn't overstimulate themselves with the use of technology and television and videos and cell phones and music and whatnot. But what I mean by stimulation is the autonomic nervous system is taking in inputs. And because of various factors that we won't get into, economic, societal, cultural, value systems, people are busier than ever, but on constantly differing tasks, constantly switching between environments. Whereas a person who was a hunter-gatherer would be busy all day, but they would have maybe less objectives and maybe less tasks. You need to gather the firewood for the next 3 hours, and then we need to go cut the animal up, and then we need to start the fire. It was a little bit more simple, but now we have all sorts of real and made up things going on. And so when the autonomic nervous system gets triggered, but what you were talking about, maybe by a past experience, it's our body's automatic warning system. And so when you said the brain may not be fast enough, what I think you're referring to is our logic awareness, our frontal lobe and our prefrontal cortex being aware of why we're upset. I've had many people come in and tell me, I don't know, I just had a panic attack. I was sitting in a parking lot, and but then when upon closer examination, asking them what had happened that week. Well, I was late on my rent, and I was worried about the environment, and I was worried about catching COVID, and I was worried about my nephew, and I was worried about what would happen at my job if I showed up late or something, and all these things. But they had been so busy trying to stave off, many different problems that they didn't actually have time to sit and figure it out. And then their autonomic nervous system went into a fight, flight, freeze, or a panic sort of, and that surprised them and woke them up to something. So there's lots of ways people can have anxiety, and for some people, it becomes what we call in the psychology world, the generalized anxiety disorder is one of them, where you can have increased anxiety in multiple areas of your life for a prolonged time, increase in blood pressure, sleep disturbances, irritation, anger, poor concentration, difficulties in relationships, and many other issues, including insomnia and just hyper startle responses. And these things can be really debilitating for people, because once, let's just say it's the type of anxiety that kind of creeps up on you and doesn't have seems to have an antecedent or a reason. It's not just like, oh, I'm worried about, my job. It's creeping everywhere. It's becoming generalized into all areas of your life. It can really take over, and our body can get into a sort of rhythm that's a broken record of anxiety. Can you talk a little bit about what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, I mean, well said. The rhythm of like a broken record of anxiety. So well said, Paul, because a lot of people feel that way. They feel broken when they're unable to get past these sensations of anxiety. And, a lot of smart people have said anxiety is the flip side of the same coin. And on the other side of the coin is depression. And a lot of people kind of slip back and forth between them, because those worried thoughts, can lead to people thinking about the past, which is like a depressed state. A lot of people, though, when they're worried, they're anxious about the future, which is then that anxiety side of the coin. So, it's, a very powerful thing to do is just to breathe and to take a deep breath. And we can do that here, just take a deep breath and then exhale. Take 2 or 3 of these deep breaths. And in doing so, what we're doing is we're calming down that nervous system that we're talking about here, this autonomic nervous system. We're resetting it a bit and allowing ourselves to then see a little bit more clearly as to what we're faced with. These current approaches that I've talked about within the book are, there's many of them, but some of them at the beginning of the book are the shadow work. And Carl Jung's work of the shadow just simply says, feel that anxiety within your body, close your eyes, and sit with that sensation, sit with that feeling state. Don't push it away. Don't try and answer that with your logical mind. And when a person tends to sit with that feeling, and it can be very uncomfortable, it can actually peak and feel very almost stagnant for a bit. Just sit with it, and maybe set a timer on your phone and be with that. Typically, a person begins to feel and notice something about themselves that they didn't know before. And that's an extremely helpful thing to do, because quite often these answers are there, and they're within the unconscious mind. So when a person sits with that shadow work, that feeling state within their body, that's when their unconscious mind begins to open up. And both halves of their mind, their rational mind and their unconscious mind, begin to deal with the situation.
So interesting you say that. I definitely think that it's good to get with a practitioner or a clinician for this, because I think when people are experiencing anxiety, even something as simple as sitting with the anxiety and listening to it and feeling it out and working on the shadow work, I think that could actually make somebody anxious, because one of the things I've noticed when people are anxious is they get anxious about feeling more anxious, which then makes them more anxious. And that reminds me a little bit of what they call panic disorder. When you get a panic attack, and then you try to control not having any more panic attacks, and the more you try to control not having a panic attack, the more panic attacks you have. So interesting you say slow down the autonomic nervous system. Part of it is that what I found with anxiety is it's very hard to think your way out of anxiety. Now, with a practitioner or with an out loud script or with a writing or some of the things you've listed in this book, I think you can think your way out of it. But a lot of it is physiological. We have to start getting our body into a state like almost like fake it till you make it. We have to start breathing slower, taking a time out, turning off the phone, sitting in nature. Getting away from the stimuli and letting some of this energy work its way out. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yep. You're saying exactly what I'm talking about here, Paul, because when you're sitting with it and you're slowing down to actually feel it, it's fascinating because we're told don't feel things that you don't want to feel, push them away. Take this or do this or work out. And there's nothing wrong with working out. There's nothing wrong with taking medication that's prescribed. Okay. But when we're talking about things that are beyond that, sitting with it, what I've recognized over time in my practice and what the clients that I've worked with have told me as feedback is that it helps them validate their experience by sitting with it. And that's huge because instead of invalidating by saying, don't feel this way, push it away. This is the opposite of that. This is saying, whoa, well, hang on, even though it's uncomfortable, I'm going to sit with this for just a little while so that I can validate myself and this experience and not say there's something wrong with it or that I should not feel this way. It's taking away the shoulds and the coulds and just being with what is and just allowing that sensation to be. And you're right, absolutely. Possibly have a counselor's name on hand, and in your phone so you can reach out if that person tries this and they get stuck and they feel like, oh no, now I really have this big anxiety and I need further assistance with it. By all means, shadow work can be an opening towards getting more help. And if it doesn't resolve the situation. And so for sure, that person should reach out and get some assistance if needed from a professional.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's definitely something I say in every show is that while you can get a lot of information from podcasts and books and television and movies and YouTube and all these things about psychology, until you know how to apply the methods, and often you can't do that without somebody who is able to be a mirror to you or to help you through or help you actually experience these methods, you won't see much change because knowledge without action is just more information, which could possibly even lead to more anxiety. Because here I know all these things about anxiety. Why am I not feeling any better? So I think that's amazing. To talk about, therapy has been proven time and time again to be very effective for anxiety, psychotherapy and counseling, interchangeable terms. And there are thousands and thousands of studies on that. So we don't even need to go into that. I mean, I think there's over 20,000 at least that prove that. But let's talk about some of these different things. I would say one of the ones that interested me from your book was this energy psychology, which seems to be related to hypnosis. But can you explain to me what this energy psychology is?
Oh, for sure. So energy psychology has been around for a while. It's a well-respected form of psychology. It deals with, from my understanding of it, it deals predominantly with the unconscious mind, and things that I mentioned in the book here are chakra balancing and such. But if a person's not experienced within the world of chakra charts or chakra experience, they can still get help within this topic or this area of the book. So one of the things that I do with people with the energy psychology is I'll ask a person to close their eyes and connect with the anxiety, kind of like the shadow work, but there's an added component to this. The component is to identify what color did they associate with that energy. And then that person could literally, then if they have availability to a chakra chart, they might identify what color that chakra is, and then read additional information, corresponding information as to where that might pertain to them. So, for example, people who tell me they feel anxious and they close their eyes and they see red, that happens to correspond with the root chakra. Now, root chakra can deal with things such as grounding within that person's life, feeling on a stable platform, and many other parts to that person's being. So if there's something unresolved within that definition of the root chakra, then that person also has additional topics to address and to work on. Someone might say, well, I see gold, the golden color, or yellow. Well, that happens to fall into the sacrum chakra. And that's a little bit higher up on the chakra scale. But now if a person says, well, I don't have access to a chakra chart, I'm not interested in the chakra chart, I respect that too, I'll just say, well, whatever color comes to mind. And then I want you to think about when you're experiencing calm within your life, what color do you associate with the calm? And then just in a guided meditation, I ask that person to breathe the color of calm in and then exhale the color of the stress. And by doing that for just a period of 1 minute, a person typically feels balanced. They feel more at ease. Now, that type of work doesn't always deal with getting at the root issue. So that's why it's important to seek additional help and seek a licensed practitioner, a licensed therapist in order to help a person if that continues to come up. Because I wouldn't want that to be just a Band-Aid and not a person get to the root issue of what's happening.
Right, that makes sense. So an intervention such as that could really help somebody feel better in the moment, especially with a person who knows about it. But perhaps there might be a root issue going on that they've got to take care of. Something else that struck me about your book. I had not really heard of somebody use this before, but shame is combined with anxiety. When shame is combined with anxiety, I hadn't heard that before. That is new to me, honestly.
Okay.
So apparently, you said here the emotion of shame can be a voiceless form of anxiety.
Yes.
And so I hadn't thought of that, but internalizing a shame, or somebody who's been shamed, blames themselves for something that happened, or a catastrophe, or something, and this can produce anxiety. And can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I added this part to the book because I had seen this so many times within my practice, where a person is dealing with some phenomenon that's happened within their life, some event that was out of their control, or maybe they contributed to part of the experience that became out of control. And then shame is added to it. And shame is like this internal view of what has happened. As a matter of fact, just recently, and some information that I saw on a newscast just last week, they were talking about this concept of shame. And they said shame is not something we're born with. There are these primary emotions that human beings are born with, and shame isn't one of them. So shame is either taught by a parent, but it's typically not. It's typically taught by someone external to the family, such as a teacher or a friend or some other person that's in that person's life. And then it gets carried forward. Well, if that shame is unresolved and then it gets mixed with this root cause for the anxiety, it has sort of like a compounding effect that both of them then need to be dealt with in order to help that person overcome the anxiety.
So the shame is sort of this view of what happened, and then the person internalizes it and feels, I guess, shame about it or poorly about it. And then this
Right.
can get coupled with anxiety,
Hmm.
is what I'm hearing. So yeah, I've never heard that before.
Right.
Now you cover some interesting ones. Obviously, exercise is well known to help anxiety, and
That's
eating
right.
certain foods and avoiding certain like caffeine and things can help with anxiety for sure. Um, I thought about this other one, artistic expression.
Hmm.
Um, I've heard of it. I've heard of the term sublimation, where you take something that bad that happened and you try to turn it into something good or something artistic.
Ah,
But tell me a little bit about how maybe somebody expressing themselves artistically could help with
sure.
anxiety.
Sure, absolutely. So, yeah, I took this part out of a training that I attended from the Carl Jung Institute out of Switzerland. And what had happened was they actually advised people to sit with what they were dealing with and then journal about it. Okay, so the first step is to identify what, in this case, what you're anxious about, create a heading, journal about it, take that journaling, boil it down into a single sentence, okay, and then take that sentence and turn it into an artistic expression. So what happens with that four-step process is that that person begins to like 3D see what was causing the anxiety, and in that, it's pretty cathartic. A lot of people feel a release, and some people take that and put it on a wall. Some people see it and they say, "Aha, this is what has been at the root cause of this for me." And they burn it or shred it or tear it up and throw it out. So because they've identified it, they can see it. Um, that's a very powerful example. I didn't include all those steps within the book because I don't own that method. I advise people to do that, but in the book I have kind of given a shorter version of it. But here on the podcast, I wanted to speak more to it as to what occurs within that and how I arrived at that topic.
Yeah, I think that's very, very profound and useful for people to use artistic expression and anxiety. Um, so another thing I thought about was, well, mindfulness. Of course, we've talked about that a lot, but I do think if somebody can use mindfulness meditation as something for anxiety, this may be very useful because of the research coming out showing that if you can do, I mean, this is many different studies, but one of the studies was 60 days of 20 minutes of mindfulness meditation starts training the brain to become less anxious and also improves working memory and improves performance.
Yep.
So, I mean, you said you started with breathing, but are you okay explaining a little bit about what this mindfulness meditation would be?
Oh,
Um,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, so the meditation, the breathing, breath awareness meditation deals with when a person's breathing and if a thought enters their mind, it's to not judge the thought. It's to see it as like a cloud passing through the sky and then just return to the breath. And what that's doing is, again, this is a lot of these skills are bringing the person back to validating their existence or validating their experience. So, but that breath awareness just allows that person to sit with that with that feeling and be with it and just allow whatever's coming up for them, and just not to judge it, not to not to say that this should be this way or has to be this way. It's just to allow it to be. Another part of the mindfulness that I put here in the book is Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a Buddhist master, a Zen master, who was nominated by Martin Luther King Jr. for a Nobel Peace Prize back in the 60s. And Thich Nhat Hanh says in his books, so if you're washing your hands with the water, just be with the water. Only be with the soap and be with the water. Connect with your breath. As you're walking, just be with the steps. And I believe I've mentioned this in a previous podcast, but I think it's a time-tested method. It's time-proven. And that can actually help a person reduce anxiety too, because it's connecting with the now. So if a person gets relief from their anxiety by connecting to the present moment, they can follow that by asking themselves, is what they're worried about, does it exist now? Does it exist today? If it doesn't, if it's happened in the past and that person can let that go for today, that's perfect. Just be with the now. Another skill that I don't think that I put in this book, so I might add it to a future writing, is the concept of a worry clock. So if a person's really, really worried about something that keeps coming up, but they have no resolution, they have no way to deal with it, they can actually say, well, today at 4:30, I'm going to worry about this for the next half hour of that time. So from 4:30 to 5, I'm just going to sit with that and worry. Now, outside of that time, if I have that worry come up, I'm going to send it to that time and not worry about that now, but worry about it then.
I like that. Keep going.
Now, a person who does that, they need to do the worrying, though, at 4:30, because if they don't, then their mind and body is going to say, you didn't do that. You didn't say what you're going to do. Now you're going to worry about it all the time again. So it's important to hunker down and worry. And one of the people that I was working with this skill, they took it to the next level, and they said during that time, they actually plan. They worry, and then they strategize how to address what they're worried about during that half hour. And I said, that's fantastic. I'm going to pass that along.
I love it. One of the things about mindfulness is it's almost countercultural to the Western world. I mean, mindfulness-based stress reduction was brought, I suppose, to the University of Massachusetts Medical Center by John Kabat-Zinn in the early 80s. And he basically medicalized a Buddhist practice of meditation and made it secular and accessible to people here in the United States, where the primary religions are Christianity, Catholicism, and things like that. Right. And so not very Eastern-minded. And he was able to bring that in and show with amazing results that people even facing end of life were able to reduce their stress by doing these meditations, simple things of just breathing and sitting with it, noticing. But a lot of things taught from the Buddhist traditions. And interestingly enough, there's an old adage from psychology. It says, if you think about the future, you've got anxiety. You think about the past, and you've got depression. And you think about the present, and it's a gift, right? Or something like that. But essentially, when you actually focus your mind on the water while washing your hands, or if you're in the shower and people have good ideas in the shower. Why? We're isolated. We're away from our electronic devices. We're not having conversations with people. We're listening to the water. We're feeling the water. We're attending to the body. A thing that a lot of is also countercultural. People ignore their body's cries, what I call symptoms, but they're cries for help or cries for rest. And they say, no, I've got to push forward. I've got to get this done. Let's go get 5-hour energy from the gas station and put that gas in my tank, right? We're ignoring our body's natural upset. So with that, if you ever want to just do an exercise, without a practitioner, starting out with a mindfulness meditation exercise. There was one called the raisin. And there's this whole thing where you hold the raisin, you think about the raisin, you stare at the raisin, you think about the raisin as a grape, you touch the raisin with your tongue, you put it in your mouth, you focus, and it takes like 7 to 10 minutes to do this activity. And it's so interesting how, especially if you get led through the activity, it's even better if you're being led through it, how all of a sudden you forgot about your cell phone bill and you forgot about where you had to go later. And some people call that mindfulness, and some people call that getting into the flow of life. And when you're in the flow of life, you are experiencing things as they come without trying to heavily regulate the clock. And I think sometimes, I love that you talked about the clock and putting the anxiety in that clock, but I think for some people, the clock is such an anxiety-producing tool. Only I don't know how long we've, I know that in Japan, they've had clocks for hundreds of years going back, but I don't know how long we've really been measuring time the way we do now, as opposed to ancient mankind for most of our existence on the planet have been measuring it by the sun and where the sun was in the sky, and unless you were in certain northern regions, where the stars were, and sort of planning their day around the way the world was, not what the clock said. And I think there's something to that more. It feels less jarring to think, well, when the sun gets by the trees, come in from the field and we'll eat some bread, versus, I told you, Timmy, at 6:15, you are to leave your friend's house. You are to walk here. And if you're not here by 6:25, I'm calling your uncle, or whatever. Right. Your father's going to be angry, and we're taking away all of your electronic devices, and we're going to make you eat gruel. I don't know. It just, it's so jarring to think about. What about tick, 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 tick? The clock's ticking. What if I'm having the best time of my life with my friend? I can't wait for the sun to go down. I've got to be on this sort of this schedule. It reminds me of James Hillman, psychotherapist, former Jungian. He was kind of invented his own thing. If you haven't read him, I recommend it to the audience. But I saw him speak before he died in, must have been 2010 or something. And he said he gets lots of patients wanting to change their lives, and they'll let him do all sorts of treatment interventions in the therapy hour. But he said the most resistance he's ever received from patients across the board was when he tried to treat their schedule.
Yeah. So, well, for sure.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, with these, scheduling. Wow. I mean, you're right. There are these major worries in our lives. There's finances, there's relationships, and both of those deal with scheduling. A lot of that, it boils down to, can you fit it in your schedule? Can you, garner time within your schedule? And the anxiety that can produce, it can be overwhelming for some people. I just think of some basic organizational skills. If a person's very anxious about not being able to schedule properly, if they take a quick course or they learn some techniques on how to effectively manage their time, there's podcasts on this, there's TED Talks on this, there's written material on organizational skills, and those skills can help a person feel more relieved, because it gets back to the old axiom or the old idea that if you're responsible for your time, then there's freedom within that responsibility. And that can be useful. And also being responsible for using some of these skills or other skills that have been helpful can be helpful. It can be utilizable. I'm looking further down, talk about alchemy and anxiety. Carl Jung mentioned that there are these dialectics So dialectics are opposites. If a person's feeling really down, if they're feeling anxious and they're worried about this, what's the natural opposite of that? And if a person sits with those two things, knowing that there are opposites within nature, there's the sun and the moon, and there's water and fire, and there's water and land, and there's various opposites within nature. That could be a reflection or a mirroring for a person's life too. So get with these opposites, and then breathe in the experience that you want. Try and change that feeling state within yourself, and see if that offers some balance within the life.
I like it. Yeah, I love alchemy. There's a lot of really interesting lectures on alchemy, and the symbols of alchemy and what that means. And really, it's not what I don't think it's what most people think about trying to turn lead into gold. It's really about the human condition and the states of our moods. And actually, there's a really interesting audio book you can check out. I believe it's called The Alchemy of Psychology by James Hillman.
Wow.
I'm just pegging James Hillman all over today. But
Nice.
He talks about every different color that the alchemists discovered in their work, and how that applies to the mood, and also Greek mythology and different things like that. So there's a lot of richness in what you're talking about. Now, we couldn't go through a whole podcast without mentioning EMDR therapy. And in your book, you do mention it briefly, eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy, which is really an excellent therapy for people with anxiety, I think, even though it's really, of course, been empirically proven for post-traumatic stress disorder. One of the major symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder is anxiety and hypervigilance in the system. And so I know you talked about stage fright in here, and how a lot of people have used EMDR therapy for stage fright, and just that single incident. And we've had a lot of people with fear of driving after a car accident, who have been coming to our counseling clinic here, the Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids in Health for Life. And we've had a lot of people who have had, this is interesting, a breakup, with dating, and then they're afraid to go date, right? They're afraid to date anyone else after this breakup. And so it's anything that somebody becomes fearful of and anxious of could possibly be traced to an origin. The car accident's obvious. The stage fright is obvious. The breakup is obvious. Other things aren't as obvious. But the best part about EMDR therapy and some of the mindfulness therapies we've talked about is that you can really dig in there and try to figure out where is this coming from? And there's some techniques that we can't really get into too far here without getting too technical. But there are techniques that get beneath the snap judgments of trying to figure it out in a session. It might even take 25 minutes to get there. But if you do one of these techniques, such as float back or something like this, a practitioner might know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
You will find some origins of where this anxiety began. And if you find out where that is and you target that with EMDR, one of these therapies, I mean, you're going to be feeling like a brand new person. And a lot of people think that that's crazy, but I'm telling you, it's empirically proven to work, and it works for most people. This therapy is highly effective. I mean,
agree.
If you can believe that a medication can change you, why not, a processy with the practitioner? So
exactly. Yeah. Well, if I could just speak to that, EMDR, I'm a huge fan of EMDR. I've been trained in it. I've attended a lot of their trainings, of the EMDRIA, which is a EMDR International Association group. As far as what it talks about is what's called AIP for short, adaptive information processing. So when a person's receiving EMDR, both hemispheres of their mind are actually dealing with in this case, within the anxiety or what's causing either the car crash, the breakup, whatever's happened. And it's creating this ability for their mind to see it and feel it from a different perspective, and actually create positive cognitions or positive thoughts out of the experience within that. So yeah, EMDR is phenomenal. It's been around for about 30 years, and it's extremely helpful. Um, a lot of the people in the hypnosis circles, they look at EMDR and they say it's great when a person's eyes are moving back and forth. They see it as that they're entering into a trance. That may be so. I'm not quite sure. I'm trained in both, and but I can tell you that if it is a trance, it's a very it's a mild trance, because that person's extremely aware of what's happening for them, and they're very present and in the moment. And there's ways to help them straddle that within that process of EMDR. So, but yeah, I mean, literally, if a person is dealing with the anxiety, I also mentioned the topic of laughter, and I'll never forget, attending a laughter workshop at the Reba, which was at the time Magellan Healthcare in the Valley of the Sun here in the Phoenix area. And there was a gentleman, his first name was Markham, and he gets up there and he just starts chuckling, just like a low chuckle. And I'm thinking, well, I understand that the topic is laughter, but how is this, going to help? What's this going to be? But it's funny because it's contagious. It just, starts with a low chuckle and then just like a giggle. And then beyond, just within a short period of time, the whole room was exploding with laughter. And it was therapeutic. It was very helpful. I mean, the guy never said, now focus on what you're anxious about or what you're doing. But oh my word, we felt lighter afterwards. We felt relieved, and went off to have a great time, that day. So laughter helps kind of reset the mind and the physiological experience, the mind and body experience. And Milton H. Erickson, who created the Ericksonian, he talked about the concept of pain, which anxiety can actually be pain can cause a lot of anxiety. So I just want to speak to this for a moment, because I think it deals with anxiety as well. He wrote within his book, through some studies, that if a person is experiencing laughter, just uncontrolled laughter, spontaneous laughter, you cannot have pain and therefore I say anxiety at that same time while you're experiencing spontaneous, uncontrolled laughter. It just can't happen at the same time.
I love it. And one of the things that struck me about laughter is I think that for a lot of people, anxiety is a stress or a physical sensation in the body and the mind about wanting control. And when you want control, which most people want some type of control about their life, you see this when people have phobias. Why don't you want to go up in the hot air balloon? Because I'm out of control. I have to trust that the balloon is going to land and not hit electrical wires. And why don't you want to go in an airplane? Because I don't know what if the pilot has had a bad day, or was drinking, or what if the plane malfunctions? And when a car, people feel like they're in control, even though there's other people who may not be in control of their car, but you feel like you're in control driving a car and walking around. But as humans, we're vulnerable. There's a lot of things bigger than us in this universe,
Sure.
And
well, why don't you want to get up on the stage? Why don't you want to give a presentation in front of your colleagues? Why don't you want to do the and then fill in the blank? If there's anxiety about these things, why not deal with the anxiety? That's how what I'm talking about within the book and what we're talking about here on your podcast, how that translates into life. And to help create that flow that you mentioned, that flow within the life, because when there's less of that anxiety, then there's more of that rhythm and that flow, that river within that person's life.
I agree completely. And one of the last points I wanted to make about control real quick was it struck me that when the whole class was laughing, it became almost out of control laughter, I think is what you said. Laughing uncontrollably, because what if you really laugh in a belly laugh, and you may be watching a comedian or something like this, or something just hilarious happens to you or absurd, you almost can't stop laughing. It's almost like a hiccup. And I wonder if that isn't releasing some of that tension of needing control and reassuring you in a way that it's okay to not be fully in control all the time. And so I wonder if that has something to do with that. I just was curious about that. One of the things I think I really liked in your book, and I'm not sure if you said it like this or not, but making peace with your anxiety, meaning that you may continually feel anxious about some things, but if you can have a meta-awareness or meta-consciousness that you are not your anxiety. The anxiety is being experienced by your physical body, by your nervous system, by your mind. And because of the circumstances you're in, and you're able to zoom out and see a bigger picture, you may be able to have peace at the same time feeling anxious. That was interesting to me. What do you think about that?
Yes. It's that making that peace with the anxiety. If that person can just literally, come to terms with, for example, there are things that can create anxiety. I deal with some people who have cancer. I deal with some people who have unexplained medical issues. I work with some people who have had things that they did not expect to occur within their life. And if a person can come to terms with, am I doing all that I can do to address what I'm faced with? Am I following the doctor's recommendation or whomever I'm seeing of their recommendation? And am I taking the necessary steps to be in the present moment? That, I think, can usher in that acceptance and making peace with what a person's faced with. I tell you, it's so important to be able to do that if something especially is ongoing and it's seemingly out of control. What part of that do you have control over? And if there's something that you do have control over, what are you doing with that? And know that can change over time. You might think that these are the steps that you need to do today. Great. Maybe in a week from now or in a month or two, those steps can change. Be with the now. Be with what is today.
So breaking down, if we have a loss of control, which can lead to anxiety, breaking things down into small things we could control might help us feel a little bit better.
Absolutely.
Instead of thinking about the global. So Andrew, this is just great information. I believe this is your third book that you've put out there. It's on Apple Books.
That's correct.
And I wanted to get a little bit of information about how can people work with you, because I understand there's multiple ways to work with you, both with your license and your coaching business. Can you tell me about both?
Sure. So my license practice is just for people in the state of Arizona because of the constraints of the license, which is just here in Arizona. And then as far as the coaching, where I coach people on various elements of the things that are found not only in this book and beyond, they can contact me through my website, which is counselingbyandrew.com. And there they can fill out a form to contact me to schedule a meet and greet or an appointment for the coaching. And a lot of people don't want to be so formal and say, I need a therapy appointment. I just need someone to coach me or to listen to me about what I'm faced with. And I can do that there. I can offer that. And that's outside of the scope of Arizona. I can do that with people from all the states in the United States and other parts of the world too. So
I love it. So you have a lot of coaching you do as well. And I know that you did some mindfulness coaching. And I'm not sure if you were doing some hypnosis as well, or is that more in your licensed practice?
That's more in my licensed practice, the hypnosis. And I've done trainings on hypnosis and some shadow work, and that could be attended by anyone. And because that's not underneath the purview of my license, so as a matter of fact, I have a training that's coming up on the information in the book that I just covered, and where I'm going into in-depth information about these steps and how to apply them in a training workshop format. And that's going to be October 1st and 2nd, Friday and Saturday.
Of 2021, October 1st and 2nd of 2021, right, which is perfect. I believe this will be out before then. How can people attend this workshop?
They can attend it by contacting me through my website, and I can get them signed up for the workshop. And it's through a training consortium. So and Randy Webb's going to be the host. All right, he's going to be the mixologist person. So.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, that's exciting. Yes.
Yeah.
Randy also a frequent guest on this show when I can get him.
Right.
That's awesome. Very excited about that. I'm going to have to talk to you about that myself.
Great.
So.
Great. Well, and I'd almost be remiss if I didn't mention one last thing about the anxiety. There was a phenomenal TED Talk by Kelly McGonigal, PhD, and her concept of anxiety really kind of turned some of this information on its ear. She did a longitudinal study where she examined, I believe it was a total of 500 people, or 500 people, a total of 1,000 people, 500 people who believed that anxiety should be pushed out, should not be dealt with, 500 people who felt like if you're feeling anxious, get up and do something, see it as a wake-up call to actually do. And she said that this longitudinal study showed that those people who did something about what their mind and body were telling them to do, to wake up and do something, they did way better. They felt better. They were physically more fit and had less repercussions from the anxiety itself. So, I think that just lends itself to say, well, another skill here then would be if you're feeling anxious and your heart's pounding or you're feeling tight or something, why not get up and do some stretching exercises? Why not do something with that anxiety? And it could be doing something what you're anxious about as well.
I think that's great. To take action is important. And I think it's especially important with anxiety, and depression, but anxiety can be just as paralyzing as depression. And so if we can get that motivation to even move and stretch, I think that can start to turn things around. And I think especially with the teenagers and the young adults that I've been reading about, reading their phone for 7 to 10 hours a day in between appointments and work and school, we've seen an epidemic of anxiety, not just what's happening in the news. So I think that's important to remember, that life takes place in your body and where you are. And yes, life is taking place elsewhere, and you can read about it all day ad nauseum and watch videos about it. But remember that life is taking place where you are. And to be quite honest, I think phone addiction will be in the next edition of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of disorders. Phone or internet addiction. Yeah,
I agree with you. Yeah, I think that the last two generations have had that, the computer in their hand, the ability to connect with things that are right there, immediate. And that's something different than the generations before that, before smartphones were invented, and the complexities that go with that, but also the gifts that go along with that. And it's about being, again, organized with your time, being responsible for what you are choosing to do with it. It's a choice, and then adhering to that. That helps reduce the anxiety related to these things, and just a quick snapshot of. that. All right.
I love it. Well, Andrew, it's been my pleasure having you on the podcast today. I'm excited about your workshop. I'm excited for people to check out your book, Anxiety When Enough is Enough, by Andrew Henry, Masters, LPC, licensed professional counselor, and checking out your website, counselingbyandrew.com. And I'm sure we'll have you back once again.
Very good. Looking forward to it in the future. And thank you for the now. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk with your people and the people that are listening to this podcast, and to know that there is a way through and to deal with anxiety if you're faced with it. Thank you.
Thank you. And there you have it. This has been another episode of the Intentional Clinician Podcast with Paul Krauss. If you're enjoying this podcast, please share it with people you know. I would surely appreciate it. If you were looking for an EMDR IA consultant, I am almost a complete EMDRIA consultant, but currently a consultant in training, and I can provide 15 of the 20 hours needed to become EMDRIA certified, soon to be 20 of 20 hours. I have consultation groups ongoing online right now. You can learn more at counselingsupervisorgr.com or healthforlifegr.com and just send me an email. If you are in need of counseling, do not hesitate to make an appointment with a local counselor in your area. You can also make an appointment with the excellent clinicians in the Grand Rapids and Ada, Michigan area at Health for Life Counseling and the Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids by visiting www.healthforlifegr.com. That's www.healthforlifegr.com, or give the office a call at 616-200-4433. If you are in the state of Michigan, you can even do telehealth if you can't come into the office. The recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss and his guest, and while these are based upon literature they have read and their experience in the field, this podcast should not be viewed as a definitive opinion on any subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment. If you are in a crisis, please dial 911 or the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-8255. Are you a young person of color? Feeling down, stressed out, or overwhelmed? Text the word STEVE, that's STEVE, to 741-741. That number again is 741-741, and a live trained crisis counselor will respond. Did you know you could support your local bookstore by shopping at www.bookshop.org? You can order books from the comfort of your own home and know that you are supporting local bookstores around the world and in your neighborhood with each purchase. If you are a therapist and you are not a member of your local state association for counseling or therapy, please understand it is vital to join. So many things are happening in back rooms of politicians' offices and other large entities that are going to make it difficult for people to receive proper mental health care and difficult for it to be in schools, as well as difficult for you to be reimbursed for your services by insurance companies. Please get involved. In Michigan, we have the Michigan Mental Health Counselors Association. In Arizona, we have the Arizona Counselors Association. I'm a member of both. And, of course, the national organizations of American Counseling Association and the American Mental Health Counselors Association. Please consider donating every year for your dues, because that can really help at the least. You can learn more about why that's important by listening to episode 32 and 33 of this podcast. Remember, if you're trying to get EMDR trained, you can check out EMDR Training Solutions and register now with the code INTENTIONAL. Get $100 off your first EMDR training. All right, thanks for listening, and until next time, I'm wishing you all a safe and peaceful week.